Hello, princes and paupers. My name is TB Sky, and The Dragon Prince is finally out on Netflix. And I've been quite excited for this show for quite a long time, so yesterday I sat down to watch the first couple of episodes just to kind of get an impression, just to kind of get a feel for what the show is like. And then it was several hours later, and I had accidentally watched the entire first season. I had watched all of the episodes, because after I watched the first two episodes, I could not stop. I had to know what was going to be happening next. I got sucked in. I got invested in the characters. I got invested in the plot. I got interested in the story. I got interested in the villain especially. He has a really interesting performance. And so if what you want from me is a recommendation about whether or not to watch The Dragon Prince, yes, go watch The Dragon Prince. I love it. I'm in love with it. I'm looking forward to the next season. I am here for it. I am part of the fandom. That happened pretty much instantly. However, that does not mean that I don't have some criticisms and that I don't have some stuff I want to discuss about it. When the show first was announced with trailers and stuff, I made a video about it, specifically about the animation style of the show, which was looking a little bit odd. It looked a little bit janky. It looked a little bit almost kind of like stop motion almost in the way that it was moving. And the way I defended it back then was to say that, okay, this is clearly an aesthetic choice that doesn't really look so good in a trailer cut, like where you cut from scene to scene without the context of the whole scene and the pacing and stuff like that. And mostly I would say that I was right in that video. Like that when you watch the show as a full episode, like as a full thing, a lot of the stuff that kind of looks janky when you cut it together in a trailer format looks a lot better. But there's still something janky going on here. The thing that happened to me was the first 20 minutes of the show that I was watching, and by the way, a mild spoiler warning for this video is like I'm going to have some clips from later in the show. There's going to be like a little bit of spoiler, not a lot, not big spoilers. Just if you want to watch it clean, then just, go and watch it right now without listening to me first. But the thing that happened to me for the first 20 minutes of the first episode, and like for the first few minutes of the next episode, my brain kept poking at me. My brain kept going, something doesn't look right. Something's off. Something's wrong. Something's not right. And initially, I interpreted that with some dismay that I just didn't like the animation. Like the visual style of this show just doesn't work for me. I just don't like it. But that's not true. Is the weird thing, is because when I was watching the scenes from the show, especially, for instance, this one, the character animation is uniformly excellent. Like, it just is. It's just really good character animation, and there's really not... I'm not about to have an argument about that. The people who are doing the character animation on the show know what the hell they're doing. The characters emote believably. The characters move in ways that show their personality, that show how they're feeling inside, that show their approach to the world, their mood, their relationship with the other characters, that display them. Like, the acting, essentially, in the show is really good. The voice acting is also good, but the physical acting of the characters is good. They always display their emotions clearly. They always move in the ways that you are supposed to move a character. When you're doing character animation, the character animation is, from all technical perspectives, good. So why, despite the animation, like, my objective sort of animation senses were kind of telling me, no, this is really good. Like, the people who are moving these characters around are moving them in very believable ways. So why did I keep feeling like something was wrong? Why did I keep feeling like something's off about this? Something's not quite right. And I think I've come up with a few answers. And part of that is some ways in which the Dragon Prince, the animation style, doesn't quite work. Like, there's parts of it that I have to say, no, you could have taken a different approach and it would have been better. But there are also parts of it that come down a lot more to me, the viewer. Now, your mileage may vary. If you've been watching like the first couple episodes of the Dragon Prince, or you've watched some of the stuff that's going on here, and you just go, no, I don't like that, that's bad, that's wrong, I don't like it, I don't enjoy it, I don't find it interesting, I don't want to watch it, that's completely fine. Like, I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong, because what the show did when it chose the visual style that it has is it took a risk. It took a very specific risk about how it presents itself, and risks don't always pay off. If you don't like the way that the show looks, yeah, I get it. I completely get it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like it, though, but it took me a while to figure out how to like it, how to enjoy it. And I think the thing that happens is a clash of expectations, because anytime you watch any piece of visual media, whatever the hell it is, whether it's 3D animation or live action or 2D animation or whatever it is, you come into it with a set of expectations for how things look, how things behave. Like, you don't watch a 2D movie and expect everything to move around like a live action movie, because that's not how 2D works. Everybody knows that's not how 2D works. It doesn't behave like live action, and 2D and 3D don't behave like each other. So you come into a 2D animation with a set of expectations of what you want 2D animation to do, how you want it to look, in order to look good, in order to cater to your tastes, and anything that doesn't do what you expect it to do in order to be good, well, your brain kind of has no choice but to classify it as bad. And it's the same thing for 3D animation and for live action, is that if it doesn't live up to your expectations of what good this is supposed to look like, what a good version of this medium is supposed to look like, you go the other way and you categorize it as bad. And so what happens with the Dragon Prince, because it's 3D animation, but it's mimicking, it's behaving like 2D animation, is my brain went, well, this is not behaving the way that 3D animation is supposed to behave, so it must be bad 3D animation. But at the same time, it was also going, well, it's not behaving the way 2D animation is supposed to behave, so it must be bad 2D animation. And because my brain couldn't figure out how to classify it, is this 2D animation, is it 3D animation, because the 2D animation style kept pulling me into 2D animation, but the 3D models and the things that you can do with a 3D camera kept pulling me into 3D animation. And so I think my discomfort and the thing that was taking me out of it all the time was just the simple fact that my brain didn't know how to categorize a show that looks like this. Like, it didn't know how to interpret this visual style, these visual behaviors. But once my brain sort of gave up on trying to do that, the show worked for me. It just became good, and I just enjoyed it. And so I think there was basically a period of adjustment for my brain to kind of key into how to watch the Dragon Prince, how to watch this style of animation, how to enjoy it, is a thing that you have to kind of learn. It's not something that just happens. It's a thing that you have to teach your brain how to do by sitting down and watching a bunch of it, which is why I would say, if you want to give the show a chance, watch 2 episodes. Not just one. Watch 2 episodes, and if it doesn't work for you by then, it's fine. So that's part number 1 of why the show felt janky to me. And once I had that realization, once I kind of understood, okay, why is my brain having trouble with this, that's when I could go back and kind of have an assessment of the animation that was going on, like what parts of it work and what parts of it don't work. Because there are definitely things that work and definitely things that don't. So this shot right here is from the first episode. It's kind of a good demonstration of some of what I mean. Now, in 2D animation, limited 2D, when you want a character's hair to billow in the wind, what oftentimes I see is that the animators will have like a static shot of most of the character, like the face and the body of the character will be mostly static, and then the hair will have an animation cycle. That cycle is like the same motion, just kind of in a three or four frames of animation that just kind of cycle over and over again, and then they do it at slightly different speeds. Like sometimes it'll move a little fast, a little slow, a little fast, a little slow, and it'll just kind of cycle that, and you get this nice billowing sort of natural flowing motion that works really well in 2D. But now look at this. Look at the hair on this guy. When I go frame by frame like this, you can kind of see what I mean, right? That, unlike in 2D, where, I mean, first of all, in 2D, the hair would essentially be one mass, usually. Like, they don't, in 2D, you wouldn't normally define this many individual strands of hair. But what the 3D animator has done is they've taken each strand of hair, and they're sort of animating them on slightly different timings. You can see that one frame, some parts of the hair move, and another frame, other parts of the hair move, and then it kind of goes like that. And it sort of mimics the same way that you would do it in limited 2D animation, but it doesn't quite mimic it perfectly. And that's why at least I get this feeling of, oh, this is not, that hair isn't really waving believably in the wind. There's something that's not quite right here. And that's not good. Honestly, this is one of the things where, like, where the failings, where the limitations of this style show up, is that there are some things that limited animation in 2D can do and can get away with that just don't really work quite as well when you do them with 3D animated characters. Like, no matter how much you try to imitate, it's just not gonna look as good. And shots like this, and a few other shots like it, kind of have that problem, where the limited 3D animation style just doesn't... It can't convey things as believably as 2D animation could with the same number of frames, but it also can't make it look quite as smooth and nice as you could with traditional 3D animation. For instance, this shot here, look at these two guys running in the background. Now you can see, again, there's this, this is something that you do, especially in 2D animation, is that you don't move the characters on the same frames, if you can avoid it. Because if every character moves on exactly the same frames, then the scene can look really static and kind of wrong. But what you can see here is they've mimicked from 2D animation the technique of having the characters move on different frames in order to mimic the look of the show. But look at the way that the characters in the background are running. Like, just those run cycles, it's like, oof. Something about this just doesn't really work, right? They're kind of gliding along the ground. See how they're not really bobbing up and down, they're just kind of gliding along. And it just, it doesn't quite work. It doesn't really look believable. And because it's moving on this weird sort of offset animation timing, it also ends up just kind of looking a little bit janky and a little bit off. And that's something that kind of happens throughout the show, is that sometimes there are just things that work in 2D just kind of don't with 3D animation at all. I think the action scenes are uniformly pretty great. Like, I think in action scenes where characters are moving fast and moving quickly, that's when this animation style really shines. Like, that's when it really works, when it really looks believable, when it can really believably imitate kind of the style and feeling of 2D animation, like especially these shots as the assassin is jumping through the trees up here. Like, look at that. Like, that looks completely believably like it could be 2D animated, which is partly because, of course, the model is mostly black in this lighting. But like, it also just looks... This looks really nice. And this is where you can take advantage of stuff like what you can do with a camera in 3D. Like, you can swing it around, you can be very free with camera movements in a way that it's kind of harder to do. With 2D animation, we're going to see that in a later action scene as well. But then you get to something that's slower, especially something that's very slow and emotional, like, for instance, here, where the king is hugging one of the princes. And this is where it gets a little awkward, right? Especially, like, you can kind of see it in this initial hug motion. And you can kind of see how janky it gets a little bit. And this is because this is a very slow, tender, intimate moment. And what you would normally do in limited animation, in 2D animation, you would look at a moment like that and go, okay, this is emotionally really important to the show, so we should probably spend a little bit of extra time making it look a little bit smoother, because these are very subtle movements. But the Dragon Prince does that. I did not frame by frame through that. That's how the character moves in this scene. And the motion itself is good. Like, it's someone who's like, he's hugging his father, and they're having this emotional moment, and he's kind of being overwhelmed with emotion, and so he kind of clenches up a little bit and pushes in closer and kind of screws his face up a little bit. And that works just fine. But that jank thing, no, that doesn't work. And this is where I would have said, screw the limited 2D animation style. Just move him smoothly. Just give him smooth motion, because this really slow kind of for this shot and for this emotional moment, it doesn't work. And this was one of the moments where I really felt the discomfort the most, that something was not quite right here. And that's, again, it's a limitation of the style. It's a limitation that they've chosen. It's something that I think, as the show goes on, they get better and better at navigating this. They get better and better at making critical choices about when to move the characters at this low limited animation imitation frame rate, and when to just cheat a little bit and use the full range of what 3D can do in order to deliver subtlety of motion. Because this shot right here, it's such an important emotional shot between Callum and his father, King Harrow, but that jank just took me out of it. And that was one of the moments where the animation just didn't work. Another moment, like the moments when the animation doesn't work most, I think, is when it becomes inconsistent. Now look at Ezran here, as he's climbing out behind the gate. Great, he's sort of moving around, and he's moving the grate. It has this very specific frame rate, which is kind of slow and a little bit stop motion-y, but it works. Like, on its own terms, it works okay. But now look at this. that was completely different. That was a completely different animation feeling, right? From this kind of stilted, very strong keyframe poses is what, this is something this style is really good at. It has really strong keyframes, which is why you get a lot of clarity of motion, a lot of clarity of posture and mood. But then we have this shot right here, where he's moving into the frame, and all of a sudden, look how smooth that is. Like, just how smooth and nice his motion all of a sudden becomes after it's been this very limited animation style. And that was something that took me out of it as well, because all of a sudden it felt like, oh, now I'm watching 3D. I was watching something very closely imitate 2D over here, and now I'm watching 3D animation. And that kind of bothered me a little bit. And that's, again, I think it's a matter of the animators. Like, something general about the show is the people who are working on this show are 3D animators, obviously. Like, they're 3D animators, they're moving 3D characters around, they've been trained in 3D animation, they have done work in 3D animation, that's what they're used to working in. And so what I think happens is sometimes it can be hard for a 3D animator to navigate the choices that a limited animation animator, like a 2D animator who works in limited animation, would have to make in order to get a certain shot across. And sometimes that jank kind of shows up where a 3D animator will do something that works perfectly well in 3D, but which just does not translate properly into this imitation 2D style that they're going for. Now, this fight scene right here, by the way, I think it's from episode 5, is just one of the better ones in the show. Like, look at this sequence. Look at this sequence right here. Like, that little sequence of her doing backflips and jumping around. If this was completely 2D animated, I would be fucking blown away. This is just really good. Like, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of motion, there's a lot of power to their behavior. But here you also get to see some of the advantages of using a 3D camera. Here we're doing a straight-on shot from the back of Rayla. That's the character with the elf character with the horns. And the dude in the foreground here. And then look what happens here. The camera twists a little bit. Right? You get that little pull back and that little bit of a turn, so we see them a little bit more from the side. And then you can kind of throw him off to the side. That would be really difficult to achieve in straight 2D. Like, that would be really hard to do, to get that to work right, in the same way that you can when you have a 3D camera that you can move around freely. But the action animation in general in this show is really, really good. Sometimes it's a little... There are moments where I kind of wish that they would copy more from 2D animation. There's definitely times when I wish they would use more smear frames, because, like, this show doesn't use smear frames at all, by the way. And that's one of the things that I really feel like they could have copied over from 2D animation, is to use smear frames. Now, a smear frame it's essentially this. Here you can see these trails that are coming off the daggers, that are kind of showing the arc of the motion. That's something in anime you're going to see a hell of a lot. Anime uses smear frames extensively in order to convey direction of movement, especially for fast movements like that. The Dragon Prince barely ever does it. When it does it, it's these little trails that kind of persist for a moment, but they never actually do the full smearing of the character. And that's something I really feel like they could have copied over in order to make a lot of what's going on feel smoother and more natural, is to employ a lot more smear frames, and some much more radical smear frames in order to get the motion across, because there are times when... See if I can find it. Here, for example, where the character, like, when he's coming down, it's like, yeah, there's impact, but does it feel that powerful? Not really. Like, it feels strong, but it doesn't really feel that powerful. And here's where, if there had been, like, a bit more extreme bending to the character, a little bit more squashing of him, and a full smear frame, like a really powerful anime smear frame that kind of came down, that, to me, would have conveyed the power of what's going on here a lot better. And that's, like, and I have little complaints like that in all kinds of places. But then you get shots like this one. This one is really good. I really like this one, where he throws the thing up after her. You can see him he leans into the motion, he swings the thing around, and then you get this lovely blip, right? This is something that you would also do in 2D animation, is you would go from this keyframe right here, this key pose where he's just getting ready to throw, to this moment right after he is thrown. And then kind of you can see the camera pulls back to follow. And this is something like a shot like this, with the thing going into the frame like that, with a detailed chain like that. No fucking way you're doing that in 2D. Like, no animator is gonna sit down and draw all of those chain links and draw all of that detail on the thing for one frame, and then another frame, and then another frame, and then another frame, and then another frame. Like, for all these frames in order to get that little wiggle motion of the chain, by the way. No, you don't do that in limited animation. You can't, because it's way too much work for way too little reward. But that's something you can do with 3D. And the whole that whole shot stood out to me as one of the really, really good action shots, because you really do get a feeling of impact and motion there. But there are times when just the nature of the 3D models, I think that shows up a little bit more in this fight scene. We can kind of see here that it's good, but it also feels a little bit not quite right. You can especially see this frontal shot here as he's swinging his swords around. This is where smear frames, I think, would really have done a lot to sell the power of the hits that he's throwing out here. I think is this a smear frame? I think there's a little bit of a smear frame right there. It's a little bit of one, or is it just the blade that's going past? I can't quite tell. That might be one of the very rare occasions where a true smear frame shows up. But here I do feel like the motion is a little bit on the stiff side. Like this, he could lean a little bit more into it. He could distort a little bit more. He could bend a little bit more. He could squash and stretch a little bit more. And that's something you can do in 2D animation somewhat easier, I think, than you can do in 3D. Like, the power of 3D is that once you have a character model and it's properly rigged, you can do anything you want with it. You can shoot it from any angle and it will always be perfectly consistent. But something you have more trouble doing is believable distortion of the character model, believable distortion of the character model's anatomy. But here again, you can see that the animators are good at what they do. Right? That right there, like these interactions between characters, this is really fucking complicated to do. It's really complicated to pose. It's really complicated to move in a way that's believable, that works. Like, this fight choreography is really complicated to pull off. Especially when you're working with, by the way, because the characters here, they are moon elves, they have a special ability to go invisible, so sometimes you can see them be translucent, you can see parts of her through him as he's swinging at her and stuff like that. And managing that and still making the action look relatively clear, that's really hard, and they do a really freaking good job of it, of managing not to make the characters mesh up too much with each other. It's a really difficult shot, they do a good job of it, but some parts of it just feel a little stop-motion-y. Some parts of it just feel a little bit too much like there are times when they should have used a few more frames, when they should have broken that limited animation rule a little bit more and made it just a little bit smoother, which is something they do in this fight scene, where it feels a lot smoother than it does in that early one. Where it's like, yeah, it works, but it's a little janky. And I've been very interested in that. And so the thing I want to compare to is one of the best action anime. Like, this is comparing against a high watermark, I realize, but how they handle this kind of action in My Hero Academia. Because here you can really see what you can do with smear frames. Have a look. See, here's a smear frame, 2 smear frames in fact, and you can really see how those smears convey the power of the hits that happen. You can see it again here. As All Might's punch lands, here you can see his whole arm gets smeared, almost as though it's having motion blur applied to it, right? That's making it feel so much more powerful. And it's also the screen shake, of course, helps deliver that power a hell of a lot. But it really comes down a lot to the ways you can see here how the character model completely smears out and becomes this streak, this blur, which is how you can go from here to here to here in just 3 frames, just 3 pictures, but you can deliver so much power, so much impact by using smear frames effectively. And this is a brilliant fight, by the way, just in general, but this is something that's going to come across in these shots particularly. Have a look at this. This is all smears. When anime does this, it's nothing but smears. You can see it happening over and over and over again at really rapid paces. You can see those smears happening. And that's why you get that super dynamic, super powerful, super just good sensation of fighting going on. You can see they just kind of cycle through the same few fight frames over and over again, but in motion, even when it's as janky as it is when I'm clicking through it with my mouse, it works really well. And you can also kind of see some of the same, like here, in 2D animation, the animators have to make very specific choices. You can see here, much like in the Dragon Prince, this has that same feeling when you go through it slowly of being kind of janky and a little bit disjointed. But I think the 2D animators on the show are a little bit smarter about choosing which frames to render and which frames not to render. And overall, it just looks a little bit better. Let's see, there was this, what's shot? Shot was it that I picked? It was this one right here. Take a look at how All Might moves his legs here. There. Little bit of motion. Like here, because the shot is a close-up on their legs, and the motion of their legs is a sort of a metaphor for how the fight is going, and All Might is the one who's pushing forward, right? This is a really important moment in the fight. And so see, this is really smoothly animated. Like there's a lot of animation frames, there's a lot of very careful motion going on. They're rendering the details on his pants very deliberately in order to really convey the physicality of the legs underneath, and you can see they're doing a lot to make this walking animation very, very smooth, like as smooth as they can under the constraints of their particular budget. Whereas, like here, it's just, you can see it's just all smear, 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 smear. And so I think experienced 2D animators, like the ones who work on My Hero Academia, make somewhat better choices about when to render a lot of extra frames and when to render like fewer limited animation frames when it comes to shots. And that's just, I think that's just an effect of, presumably the people who are directing this will have some experience directing 3D, and the animators who are working on this will have experience working in 3D, but aping that 2D imitation style, it demands a lot of extra knowledge of the animators. It demands a lot of study. It demands a lot of extra care and attention. And so I think it's just a matter of experience, like that the animators who are working in 3D on the show might not be as experienced making those same kinds of creative choices in 2D. And that's why the show ends up looking, in some ways, a little bit janky, where they make, for instance, in this scene right here. Like I said before, the character animation is great, but take a look at this. Right, see, that looked really janky. That looked really, really stop-motion-y. And the reason why it looked that stop-motion-y is because... Let's see. There. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2... So, 1, 2, 3... Right? This is where I would... In limited animation, in an anime, I would expect to see the character moving the grate a lot more smoothly than this, rather than, like, with that much kind of suddenness to the motion, where it's like, all of a sudden, he's just kind of, yeah, he's moving with that very suddenness. And part of it is because in anime, he would never move like this. Like, in limited animation, Ezran, the character, would never move like this. Like, he would, like, you can see how much, when he's in there, see how much he's turning his head to look at the frog, like this little subtle head turn, and his lips are extending, and then he turns his face back towards the grate, and then, like, he's constantly moving his head relative to his body, he's changing his posture, he's changing his positioning, and then as he comes out of the grate, you can see how he kind of twists into the camera and he kind of sits down on his side. That's a really, really, really complicated motion to animate, and so in limited animation, usually you wouldn't see an animator do that unless it was like a Disney production or something. The animator would go with a much simpler set of poses. And part of the advantage is that because they can do so much work in turning the character, rotating the character, moving the character around, you can get some action that just, like, when you speed it up a little bit, you can really see that the physicality works really, really well. Like, he has a really wonderful body language that's going on that you just could not do in limited 2D animation. But the jankiness, like the suddenness, because a lot of the motion that he's doing is supposed to be really very subtle, honestly. Like when it comes down to like animating this kind of thing in 3D, you need a lot of subtle motion to kind of sell the smoothness of that behavior. But because it's choosing not to be smooth, and it's choosing these very complicated motions that need to be smooth, it just doesn't work. And it's the same thing in this shot right here. This is an important emotional moment. As you know, Callum is hugging his father, and he knows that his father is probably about to die. That's what's going on in the scene here, and he's kind of accepting that he might not see him again ever. So they're hugging. His father's crying a little bit, and he's about to kind of cling him a little bit closer. Just kind of, you can see the emotion kind of screwing his face up a little bit more. It's going to affect him a little bit more. Now watch how it unfolds. That's not me frame by framing. That's not me kind of making it intentionally look janky. That's how it's animated in the show. And this is one of those moments where it's like, in limited animation, that's not how they would have done it. Like in limited 2D animation, I really don't think that's how they would have done it. In limited 2D animation, they would have said, okay, this is an important emotional beat. We're going to put in a lot of extra frames. Like we're going to intentionally spend more time making this looking as smooth and as natural as possible. But the 3D animators here make the choice to make it look like it's a robot moving, like it's a badly animated GIF or something, and it just doesn't work. And that's just, it's a bit of a mixed bag across the show. But generally speaking, the longer the show runs, by the end of like by episode 7, 8, 9, I never saw shots like that. I never really noticed shots like this again, where it was clearly, obviously, ooh, that's, you kind of failed on imitating the thing that you wanted there. That never happened. That never really happened much again. So I think it's a question of growing pains. I think it's a question like Season 2. That's why part of why I'm excited for Season 2 is I'm really excited to see how the animators take the lessons that they learned from doing this first season and apply it to the next one. Like I'm really excited to see whether they choose to go harder on really trying to study and imitate the ways in which like action shots and subtle emotional beats are done in 2D limited animation. Sorry, I just got distracted looking at My Hero Academia. It's so fucking good. I'm really interested to see what lessons they take, like what improvements they make to the animation of the show going forward, because this is experimental. Like this, I have never seen another show animated quite like this. Because like I said, the quality of the character animation is through the roof. Like it's so good. Like this whole shot, despite looking so janky, like I said, it's a really complicated series of motions. It's really complicated to get that to look believable, to make that look like believable human motion, and to make that physicality, the weight of it, look correct. And they do manage that. It's just the choice of which frames to render and which frames not to render, like this jump right here, where it's just like, ooh, I would have gone with I would have gone with something smoother if I was animating this in 2D. But they were trying to make it look more 2D by intentionally making it look less smooth, and it just doesn't quite work for me. Anyway, I think I'm going a little bit in circles here, which is usually an indication that I have said all I wanted to say. Generally speaking, the characters are great, and the character animation is great, and the way that the characters relate to each other is fantastic. And a lot of the action shots, especially this chase scene in the forest, by the way, is just really, really works like gangbusters. This is really when that limited 2D 3D animation style shines, when it really shows what it can do in terms of conveying a scene like this. And this is something that I feel like would not be possible in the same way in 2D animation. That's when the strengths of the show really come out to play. And it's the same thing with the forest fight scene later on. So hard doing this in fucking Premiere Pro. Like this that right here, it really does work. I have nitpicks, but like this shot right here is just so good. It's just so good. And it's so well done. And I'm excited for what they're gonna do next. Anyway, I think I've exhausted all I had to say about it. I was really fascinated by this show. I was really fascinated by the animation. I was really fascinated by the ways that the animators were choosing to move things, and some of the reasons why parts of it weren't working for me. So in TLDR, some of it comes down to adaptation. Some of it comes down to acclimatizing to the show looking the way it does. It comes down to letting go of some of your preconceived notions of what 3D animation is supposed to look like and kind of embracing it for what it is. But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. And that's completely okay. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, you should feel very free to hit the like button down below. There's also a subscribe button. And once you click the subscribe button, there's a bell button. And if you click all of those, then there's like a 90% chance that YouTube will actually think that you have subscribed to my channel and it will show you my videos. So if you want that, you can do that. If you want to help the channel and help me pay for food and rent and stuff, I have a Patreon that you can go to and support with whatever you want, like $1. $1 makes a big difference in the long run, honestly, to me. So if you want to do that, that is an option that's available to you. There's a number of perks over there. There's the like little rewards you can get, and you can get to sometimes to vote on topics for videos that you would like to see. So that's an option. If you do not like this video, that is completely okay. There's a dislike button down below that you can click on at your leisure in order to tell YouTube that you do not like this video. However, that dislike button, in addition to being just a perfectly ordinary normal dislike button, is also an ancient artifact containing the heart of a volcano. Now, I've mostly just been using it to like keep heating my room, so like I don't have to pay much of a heating bill. That's been really useful, and like occasionally like for barbecues and stuff, it's been really nice for that. But sometimes I drop it on the floor, and it's gets a little cracked. Sometimes. And the thing about ancient artifacts containing the heart of a volcano is you don't want to shatter them, because then the volcano gets out. So if you're gonna click on it, just don't click too hard. Be gentle. Just because there's some cracks, and if you click too hard, maybe a volcano happens, and that would be really bad for the property prices in my area, and I'd probably not get my deposit back on the apartment. So, yeah. Thank you very much for watching.